Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Confederation Club Waterloo's February webinar. Our purpose is to bring digital politics to life, and we're thrilled that you can join us this evening. We're honored to host this evening's webinar with the Honorable Caroline Mulroney, Ontario Minister of Transportation, and we'll be introducing her shortly. I'll also be joined by Stephen Cage, who serves on the board of directors along with myself. I'm Barb Shackleton, President of the Confederation Club of Waterloo, and we're thrilled to have you here this evening. Before we start, I just want to let you know that we are recording this webinar and it will be made available to you in the next couple of days. And I just want to also let you know that we have a change to our webinar program. In fact, now we have a sponsor. These webinars do cost money and we're thrilled to bring them to you for free. However, Mark Maurer from the Maurer team has graciously agreed to be our corporate sponsor, and for that, we really appreciate it. So a little bit of background about the Confederation Club of Waterloo. We've been around for over 40 years, and we have a distinguished pedigree of guests that we have honored. Some of Canada's top prime ministers, including Joe Clark, Mila Mulroney, Kim Campbell, and Stephen Harper. We want to continue that legacy of honoring certainly future prime ministers, conservative prime ministers, and also MPPs, premiers, and all walks of life around bringing digital politics to life. So with that said, I'd like to hand it to my colleague, Stephen Cage, to introduce Caroline Mulroney. Stephen, take it away.
Thanks, Barb. I am honored to introduce tonight's webinar speaker, Caroline Mulroney, the Ontario Minister of Transportation. Mulroney is the elected MPP for the riding of York-Simcoe since her 2018 election and was a candidate in 2018 Ontario Progressive Conservative Party leadership election, placing third. She also served as Attorney General of Ontario from 2018 to 2019. Mulroney is the only daughter and the oldest child of the 18th Prime Minister of Canada, Brian Mulroney, and his wife, Mila Mulroney. Educated at Harvard University and New York University School of Law, and has extensive business, legal, and charitable experience prior to her entry to politics. She is fluent in French, English, Spanish, Serbian, and I understand Italian's on its way, and also serves as the Minister of Francophone Affairs. Caroline and her husband, Andrew Lapham, have 4 children and a dog, Peanut. They have a home in Georgina. Ladies and gentlemen, Caroline Mulroney.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen, for your very kind introduction. And I also want to thank the Confederation Club of Waterloo for putting this event together tonight. Good evening, everyone. Bonsoir à tous. It's a real pleasure to be with you tonight. Thank you for joining us. Like other jurisdictions around the world, Ontario has felt the effects of COVID-19 and its variants. There's no denying that the past couple of years have been hard for families and businesses in our province. This week, however, we have all received some welcome news. Thanks to our high vaccination rates and with key public health and health system indicators improving, Ontario is safely accelerating our reopening plan. As of 12:01 a.m. today, capacity limits have been lifted in many venues, including restaurants, gyms, cinemas, meetings, and event spaces, and other indoor settings that opt in to proof of vaccination requirements. I know that this comes as a huge relief for so many small businesses in Waterloo region and across the province. And if these positive trends continue, there will be a further easing of public health restrictions on March 1st. It also means that events such as this one will soon be able to move away from Zoom and back to in-person, something I know so many will welcome. While the pandemic has introduced a lot of uncertainty, it has not distracted us from our government's core mission. We have a plan that will fuel our recovery and long-term prosperity, one that will build a stronger Ontario by getting shovels in the ground on critical infrastructure projects like highways, transit, hospitals, and schools. At the Ministry of Transportation, that includes getting people and goods out of gridlock by moving forward with key projects like Highway 7 between Kitchener and Guelph, the new Highway 413, and Bradford Bypass. I'll speak more about those projects in a few moments. Because our government believes strongly in that it is economic growth, not tax hikes or spending cuts, that will put our province back on solid footing and help us meet the challenges of the future. From the start of the pandemic, we have introduced several measures to support people and businesses through difficult times. We temporarily lowered electricity rates to support small businesses, as well as families and workers spending more time at home. We've established support programs to help stabilize businesses during the pandemic. This includes the Ontario Small Business Relief Grant and the Business Cost Rebate Program, which will provide up to $7.5 billion in relief to help approximately 80,000 Ontario businesses through this challenging winter. In total, we've enabled an estimated $10.1 billion in support to Ontario businesses in 2021, with more than 60%, or $6.3 billion, going to small businesses. But we've also kept an eye on the future for when life returns to normal, because we need to be ready to bounce back as quickly as possible. For too long, previous governments ignored a growing infrastructure deficit facing our province. From time to time, they would say the right things or acknowledge the need to improve our transportation infrastructure, but they never followed through on fixing it. Our PC government is bringing an end to that era of gridlock and inaction. We're moving to deliver the right mix of infrastructure projects across every corner of the province. Under Premier Ford's leadership, our government says yes to building Ontario. Yes to getting shovels in the ground for new transit and highways. Yes to creating thousands of good local jobs each year during construction. Yes to setting Ontario on the path to long-term growth and prosperity. With the province's population expected to grow by about 30% over the next 20 years, the case for building has never been stronger. Here in the Greater Golden Horseshoe, that means 1 million new people will be joining this region every 5 years. That's 200,000 new arrivals every year. This is an incredible vote of confidence in our province and the endless opportunity that exists here. People want to live and work in Ontario and build a better life for themselves and their families. And our job as a government is to create the right conditions for success. This means doing what is right and leading for the future. It means making the decisions that will help all Ontarians in the decades to come and fixing the infrastructure deficit that previous governments and other political parties let fester, not just in the transportation sector, but right across the board. Whether it's the failure to build new long-term care beds, just 628 beds in 15 years, or letting patients languish in hospital hallways, the Liberals and NDP have a record of inaction on the things that matter most in Ontario. So that's why I'm so proud to be part of a government that has committed over $148 billion to expand Ontario's infrastructure over the next 10 years. Our plan includes more than $22 billion over the next 10 years to support the planning and construction of highway expansion and rehabilitation projects across the province. This fiscal year alone, we're investing $2.6 billion to expand and repair provincial highways, roads, and bridges. This includes over $763 million to expand the province's highways and bridges and almost $1.5 billion for rehabilitation projects. Combined, these investments are estimated to create or sustain nearly 16,000 direct and indirect jobs. In addition, as part of our government's fall economic statement, Minister Bethlenfalvy announced the investment of an additional $474 million over a 5-year period to address key large bridge rehabilitation projects in Southern Ontario. As I noted earlier, one of our key commitments in the fall economic statement is advancing planning for the new Highway 413. which would run along the western edge of the Toronto region, from the Highway 401 and 407 interchange in Halton to Highway 400 just north of Vaughan. Drivers traveling the entire route, such as someone traveling from Cambridge to Barrie, would save about 30 minutes each way during rush hour, compared to making the same trip on Highways 401 and 400. That could mean up to an hour of extra time each day, or up to 5 hours in a week. That's the difference between sitting in bumper-to-bumper traffic or sitting down to dinner with your family at home. Our clear vision for the future of transportation in Ontario also includes the construction of the Bradford Bypass. The need for a northern freeway connection between the 400 and the 404 was first identified at least 30 years ago. And growing gridlock has only made the need to build the Bradford Bypass more urgent. Local businesses and farmers have told us they want the bypass to become a reality to get their goods to market faster. And we've heard them loud and clear. We're getting shovels in the ground as we build, continuing expanding Ontario's highways to ensure that we are ready to meet the demands of a growing population. But new roads and highways alone won't be enough to meet future demands. We recognize that building reliable, fast, and frequent rapid transit across the province's busiest corridors is the key to unleashing our full potential. Over the next 10 years, we are investing more than $61 billion to transform public transit in Ontario. These investments include our priority transit projects for the Greater Toronto Area, which together form the largest subway expansion of its kind in Canadian history. And it also includes GO Rail expansion, which will transform a system built for rush hour commuting into one with all-day, two-way service on core segments of the network, including more frequent and reliable service between Kitchener and Toronto. Our government is delivering on our promise to provide people with access to better, more reliable, and more seamless rapid transit, getting people to where they need to go when they need to get there. I want to take a few moments to highlight some of the actions our government is taking to fight gridlock and enhance our transportation network in Waterloo Region and surrounding areas. The first is the engineering and environmental planning work for a new Highway 7 between Kitchener and Guelph. It is such a needed project that even the Green Party's Mike Schreiner begrudgingly supports building it, stating in 2020, and I quote, that the Conservatives should just finish the job to avoid wasting money already spent, unquote. By initiating the procurement for the Frederick Street Bridge replacement, we're continuing the critical advance work needed before this new 4-lane highway can be built. The new Highway 7 will connect the fast-growing urban centers of Kitchener, Waterloo, and Guelph, and provide relief to Highway 401. And we'll continue to move it forward until it's complete. Last spring, we also started construction for the replacement of the Grand River bridges on Highway 401 in Kitchener. This project includes localized widening of the highway, the rehabilitation of the King Street overpass, and the reconfiguration of part of the King Street ramp interchange. People and businesses rely on the critical connections provided by the Grand River bridges and the King Street overpass every day. This essential highway infrastructure investment will ensure that our roads are safe and support the needs of the growing communities in Waterloo Region. Now, earlier, I mentioned our work on GO Rail expansion, including two-way all-day GO train service to Kitchener. This is a massive project that will directly benefit the residents and businesses of Waterloo Region and the entire Greater Golden Horseshoe. By 2031, an estimated 2.3 million people and 1.4 million jobs will be located within 5 kilometers of an existing GO station along the Kitchener line. And so we need a transit system that will help move all of them. That's why we're hard at work transforming the Kitchener GO line into a true frequent rapid transit experience. Last year, our government released the preliminary design business case and request for qualifications for the Kitchener GO Rail expansion. Ian McLean, the chair of the Connect the Corridor Coalition and president and CEO of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce, called the announcement, I quote, a giant leap forward by the province, stating that he was thrilled by the government's deep commitment to making two-way all-day GO a reality, unquote. Soon, people will enjoy the benefits from significant service improvements and enjoy the connectivity of more direct trips between Union Station and Kitchener. This expansion is excellent news for residents along the Toronto-Waterloo Innovation Corridor, which has steadily increased job creation over the past decade. And in October, we also began piloting a new GO train service between Toronto's Union Station and London, extending the Kitchener line to new stops in St. Mary's, Stratford, and London. This new service was never intended to only connect London to Toronto. It's also about better connecting communities along the corridor and across this region. It's about making trips like London to Kitchener or St. Mary's to Guelph possible. It's about building a link between southwestern Ontario and the Greater Golden Horseshoe. Right now, the pilot includes one trip leaving from London in the early morning with one return trip from Toronto's Union Station in the evening. We know this service can be improved further, but it was essential that even during the pandemic that we make this initial connection a reality. We'll closely monitor and evaluate how the pilot goes to determine our next steps for the corridor. Another way that we can relieve gridlock throughout the region is to improve the capacity of our existing highway and transit corridors through the introduction of managed lanes. That's why we worked with the region of Waterloo to implement bus bypass lanes on highways 8 and 401 to provide more efficient local and regional bus services between Kitchener and Cambridge. These bypass shoulders prioritize local transit, GO buses, and private carriers, and they help connect people to fast, reliable, and efficient transit. And to continue moving these projects forward, our government has developed a coordinated approach to transportation planning that addresses the unique needs of every corner of the province. Over the past 3 years, we've released 2 regional transportation plans, one for southwestern Ontario and one for northern Ontario. And we're preparing to unveil our transportation plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, which includes Waterloo Region, as well as a plan for Eastern Ontario, culminating with the release of an Ontario-wide transportation plan. These plans set out a path to the year 2051, they include hundreds of near-term actions to transform the region's transportation network. And together they will form a single long-term vision for Ontario's transportation network, a series of living documents that will be continuously updated to reflect the changing needs of the people who live and work in these areas. Our government is also building future-ready transportation systems that will embrace innovation and technological change. And when it comes to that change, Waterloo Region is leading the way. Over the next 4 years, we're committing $56.4 million to create the new Ontario Vehicle Innovation Network, securing our province as a leader in the electric, connected, and autonomous vehicle sector. OVIN, which expands and replaces the former Autonomous Vehicle Innovation Network, is leveraging the province's clusters of innovation and its regional strengths and capabilities to help businesses develop, test, and prototype their advanced automotive technologies and smart mobility solutions. OVIN's regional technology development site in Waterloo is tapping into extensive local expertise and knowledge in the field of high-definition 3D mapping and localization. Communitech, the University of Waterloo Centre for Automotive Research, and other local partners have been leading the way in this emerging field. Working with industry leaders to pioneer next-gen mobility technologies, doing so will reinforce Ontario's role as a North American leader in developing electrified, connected, and automated transportation technologies. And speaking of electric vehicles, as our population increases, so do the number of electric vehicles on our roads, with nearly 70,000 registered today. We recognize that this is the future, and our government is ensuring that Ontario is a leader in this sector. That's why we have matched a federal investment of $295 million to transform Ford of Canada's Oakville Assembly Complex into a global hub for battery electric vehicle production. Our work will attract more investment, create more jobs, and secure a greener future for our children. And as we move towards having more electric vehicles in Ontario, our government will ensure that we have the roads and highways needed for them. The choices that we make today determine the future that we create. This is the guiding principle behind our government's decisions. We understand the importance of making smart, coordinated investments to build the infrastructure that we need to unleash Ontario's full potential. That's why we're working diligently to get shovels in the ground on the transit and transportation projects necessary to ensure people and businesses succeed today and for years to come. Our vision of an interconnected transportation system will provide a safe, seamless, and accessible transportation experience for all Ontarians. Working closely with our partners in Waterloo Region, I know that we can ensure people have access to the roads, highways, bridges, and transit that they need to usher in a new era of economic growth and prosperity. Merci encore de m'avoir invité à me joindre à vous ce soir, et j'ai hâte de participer à notre discussion. Thank you again for inviting me to join you today, and I look forward to our discussion.
Great. Thank you, Caroline. We're now moving to the moderated questions segment of the webinar. Club members have pre-submitted some questions in advance. If attendees have a question for the minister, please submit it through the Q&A function. I notice we've already got a couple people who submitted questions, and we'll try to get to as many questions as possible. I'd like to first actually recognize a few people who are in attendance. Amy Fee, who's the MPP for Kitchener South Hespeler. Andrew Atkin, who's the nominated PC candidate in Waterloo riding, and Kitchener Councillor Nick Hermeta. So we'll get to the questions. The first question you've touched on, but the Ford government has made only incremental progress on the new Highway 7 between Kitchener and Guelph after the province approved the freeway in 2007. Why has the Transportation Minister not completed the new Highway 7? And when will her government announce its plan to complete it, including major construction and a completion date?
Well, thank you for the question. It's a very important project, which is why I referred to it in my remarks. Look, one of the biggest issues that we saw with the previous Liberal government is that they would announce and re-announce and then re-announce projects, but they just didn't get them off the ground. And it's led to a massive, as I said, infrastructure deficit in our province, not just with roads, but across the board. But Highway 7, I think, is an excellent example of that. The Liberals first announced it would be built in 2007, and then they re-announced that they were going to build it, I think, just before the 2012 by-election. And then by the time they left office, no progress was really made on it. So I sense the frustration in the question that you posed. As I said, you know, our government is very much focused on the demands of the Greater Golden Horseshoe, and especially in the Waterloo region. The population is growing quickly. It's a center of economic growth. And so we believe that it's essential to move forward with this kind of critical infrastructure. And Highway 7 is precisely that, a project that we deem to be critical infrastructure. So it's part of our plan to connect Kitchener, Waterloo, and Guelph, and also, as I mentioned in my remarks, to relieve the congestion on the 401. So we've continued to advance the planning for the project. Engineering design and environmental assessment work for the next two phases of the project is currently underway. And you know, those are essential parts of the work that needs to be done. But we are also proceeding with advanced work. So we've carved out some things that we can get started on right away. And that includes the Highway 7 and Frederick Street underpass replacement in Kitchener. the Highway 6 and Woodlawn Road interchange in Guelph, and the Guelph Junction Railway modification. So I know that the incrementalism may seem frustrating, but it actually represents real progress. The process of engineering design and EA work, those are essential steps that have to be done. But also the act of carving out advanced work and making sure that we put shovels in the ground and demonstrate progress, I hope gives you confidence that we are moving forward with it. They're essential pieces of building, and we've already started on them.
Excellent. And you may not recall, but back in 2007, I recall a month before the provincial election is when the Liberals came out and said, yes, we're going ahead with the new Highway 7. It's a fait accompli. And really, you're right, never did anything, just new announcements every election and never made any progress. So it's great to hear the great progress we're making. Next question. And you've already answered a good chunk of this in your presentation. When will Waterloo Region ever get two-way all-day GO train service to Toronto?
Well, that I think is probably the number one question I get from representatives from Waterloo Region, because it is such a critical piece of the puzzle to really unlock the potential that's there. I mean, the growth opportunities at Kitchener, Waterloo are tremendous. Already, KW is a significant economic engine for the province. But really being able to deliver on two-way all-day GO, I know and our government knows, is essential to being able to continue to unlock that potential. And we have been working very closely with the Connect the Corridor group. I referenced that in my remarks as well, because it's not just about Toronto to Kitchener, but it's also unlocking a lot of the opportunity along the entire corridor. So we have been working since we got elected on delivering on that. As I mentioned in my previous remarks, in my previous answer, incrementalism is not bad. I actually think it's the only way to deliver these massive infrastructure projects and to show people that things are actually occurring. And so the work will be completed in phases. It has to be. And the kind of work that needs to be done is upgrading of tracks, systems, and stations. And then also we've got to move forward with the procurements for the construction of a second platform at Guelph Station, things like improvements to Guelph train drainage and the Breslau passing track. We also recently completed the construction of 2 rail tunnels under Highway 401, 409 interchange in Etobicoke, and that will support future service enhancements on the line. I recently had the opportunity to go visit this section, and it was incredible. It's a feat of engineering. The project involved tunneling less than 3 meters under 21 live traffic lanes on the busiest highway in North America. It's incredible. And that is a key part of delivering on two-way all-day GO. So combined, all of these infrastructure changes will play a key role in reaching our goal of two-way all-day service. An additional, I'll just add that an additional consideration in expanding service is remains also CN Rail's ownership and control. And Metrolinx has developed a great working relationship with CN, and we're going to continue to develop that relationship so that we can deliver on our promise.
Excellent. We have a question online that's come in. What were the most important political lessons you took away from the experience of running for the party leadership and then subsequently for your seat in 2018? How have these lessons influenced your time in office, both as an MPP and as a minister?
Well, thank you. Well, I would say that there's so many lessons that you learn when you run for a leadership, especially when you haven't been elected as an MPP first. So I would say, and I actually gave this advice recently to a few people who are thinking about running for the federal leadership now. You need to have a very strong ground game. And what that means is that you need to have people on the ground in every riding across the province, or if you're running federally, across the country, that can help you sell memberships, because that's really what a leadership race is about. It really is about who can sell as many memberships as quickly as possible. In 2018, we had a very, very short leadership race. It was like 6 weeks. And so if you're thinking about doing it, and I'm not sure who asked the question, so if you are ever thinking, if the person asking is thinking about it, then you want to position yourself early, because you never know when a leadership will occur. I mean, no one expected that, certainly not just before an election. And so you want to have, you want to be prepared for that. So that, I think, is a key lesson. How it prepared me for running in my riding, I would say running in the riding is different. You know, you mentioned in my introduction, Stephen, that I'm the daughter of a former prime minister. I'm sure most people here know that. When I told him I was thinking about doing this, and I had to convince him, actually, and he got on board with the idea. He said, the most important part of your job, and you'll have various jobs as an MPP if you get lucky enough to get nominated to cabinet, appointed to cabinet. Number one thing is to deliver for your riding. And so being present in your riding, knowing what the issues are, is key. There are a lot of events to attend. You've got to make sure that you show up and get to know all the people who are real community builders, and get to know the things that matter for them. So I think I answered the first part of the question. I didn't take notes, so I don't remember. I don't know if I answered the second part, Stephen.
Yeah, no, that covered both parts. And I should mention that during the leadership, I know you were in Kitchener during that very short
Yes.
leadership period. And the day you were in Kitchener, there was a big change. Patrick Brown, who had been the former leader, announced that he was going to come back, and he was only back for a few days before dropping out again. But you thought on the spot, and you came up with a position to take, and all the media was there, and you answered all their questions extremely well. So I was very impressed the way you were able to think on your feet in front of the very active leadership.
Thank you. Well, leadership is fast moving. You have to be nimble. That's for sure.
Good. The next pre-submitted question. As the world moves from gas combustion cars to electric vehicles, what is Ontario doing to assist Ontario-based vehicle manufacturers in the transition?
Well, my colleague, Minister Vic Fedeli, who's the Minister of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade, recently announced the second phase of something that we call Driving Prosperity, which is a strategy that we have for the automotive sector. And I alluded to it in my remarks. And that plan sets a goal to build 400,000 electric and hybrid vehicles here in Ontario by the year 2030. So it's a very ambitious goal. And we're going to do that by building homegrown supply chains for electric vehicle and battery manufacturing, harnessing really just sort of the potential of our experienced and educated labor force and our clean energy grid. So we have so many advantages here. We have the supply chain, geography, mineral resources to make the batteries and the components here. And we have the talent and the technological expertise, a lot of it in Waterloo region, to design and build the cars. And so we're very optimistic about it. Ford is investing $1.8 billion into their Oakville plant. Stellantis is investing $1.5 billion to upgrade their Windsor assembly plant. And GM is investing $1 billion into their Ingersoll plant. So there's so much investment coming into Ontario. Our government wants to encourage that as much as possible. I also talked about the Ontario Vehicle Innovation Network that we have here, where we're piloting new vehicles to use on our roads and our highways. So there's so much that we are already doing, but there's more to do. We announced recently a partnership called the Ivy Charging Network to build out charging infrastructure at the en routes along the 401, and so we're looking at it from a multi-ministerial vantage point. But we really believe that we have so much potential here from a manufacturing side.
Excellent. The shutdown of the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor had a terrible impact on local businesses, causing shutdowns of the Cambridge Toyota plant, amongst others. When will the Gordie Howe Bridge, the new Gordie Howe Bridge in Windsor, be operational to reduce future bottlenecks?
Well, we've long known that we need another Windsor-Detroit crossing. And what I would say is that the events of the last week have just reaffirmed this. And that's why our government took action. But even putting the blockade aside, the lack of a direct freeway connection from the 401 to the Ambassador Bridge has been an ongoing issue for the city of Windsor. I mean, it means that more than 10,000 trucks passing through local roads in the city each day. I mean, that's a significant issue for the city, and they're all on their way to the bridge. So the Gordie Howe Bridge is not a Ministry of Transportation project, but actually before I got into politics, I had the honor of serving on the founding board of directors for the Windsor-Detroit Bridge Authority, which oversaw the construction. And it obviously faced some challenges in the early days. There's some issues across the border in Michigan, particularly with obtaining approvals and land acquisition there. But thankfully, those projects were overcome. And I would note that one of the things that we did on the procurement of the Windsor-Detroit Bridge is because we saw that we were having problems on the Michigan side with the owner of the Ambassador Bridge, who did not want the construction for the Gordie Howe to proceed. We saw delays there. We wanted to get moving on it. And so we, as I said, we carved out early works for the point of entry in Canada. So where we could control the land acquisition process and we could get shovels in the ground, we did as quickly as possible. So construction on the bridge started in 2018. It's well underway now. It's currently scheduled to open in 2024 on the Ontario side. And so Highway 401 has been extended to meet it. And that will create an uninterrupted freeway to freeway connection across the Windsor-Detroit Bridge, Windsor-Detroit border. So it's a massive undertaking, but it will unleash so much economic potential and create a much needed additional border crossing for us.
Absolutely, thanks. We have another question that's come in online. Many people claim Ontario's hydro grid cannot deliver sufficient power to charge the expected increasing number of electric vehicles. Can you expand on this concern?
Well, that's actually very interesting. I had a meeting earlier today on this topic. And so there's a lot of work that's being done within the Ministry of Energy and the Ministry of Transportation to address this challenge. We now have 70,000, as I mentioned, just under 70,000 electric vehicles on our roads, but we have plans to build 400,000 here in Ontario, and I'm sure that there will be additional ones on our roads as well. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we're planning for where those vehicles will be and what their charging needs will be. And the current view is that many of these vehicles will be bought in sort of geographic clusters, and we need to look at it that way and make sure that the grid is ready. So it's still early days, but I can say with confidence that we are doing a lot of work on that so that we can predict what those needs will be, so that the drivers of the future aren't experiencing too much range anxiety, which is something that I hear a lot about now, and it's real. And we don't want that to deter people from adopting the new technology. So we, in addition to the work we're doing on the manufacturing side, we are looking at what the grid needs to support the adoption of the technology.
Another related question. In Ontario, residents pay a tax recycling fee on electronics. Does the minister believe that something similar would assist Ontario to deal with end-of-life electric vehicles and the massive electronic waste they will produce, including dead batteries?
Well, I think that recycling batteries is going to be one of the major challenges that we face with this uptake of electric vehicles and this widespread transition that we will experience. It's not our preference to impose unnecessary taxes on individuals. As conservatives, that's not something that we want to do, but we don't want to discourage the adoption of electric vehicles, which will ultimately support our broader environmental goals. So what we need to do is we need to see how the market for used batteries and the raw materials that are contained within evolves in the coming years. That's my view. And there will, based on that, we'll be able to determine if there's a role for government in regulating how that recycling is performed. But I think that there are actually some encouraging signs of innovative solutions that are emerging right here in Ontario. So Stelco, for example, recently announced plans to recycle end-of-life electric vehicle and lithium-ion batteries at its facility in Ontario. They anticipate recovering almost 20,000 net tons of nickel and other minerals per year from batteries. as well as almost 40,000 net tons of scrap metal from the vehicles. So, these are examples of things that are already being done here, and they're desirable resources that can be reused and repurposed in future vehicles and other products. So there's a lot to study in this area, but I agree it is a challenge, and we have to make sure that we are thinking strategically now, making the planning, thinking about how we plan for this challenge in the future.
Excellent. Does the minister believe there is a role for government in supporting hydrogen fuel vehicles at some point?
Well, I mentioned earlier Ontario's Vehicle Innovation Network, and their mandate includes supporting research and development for alternative fuels, including hydrogen fuel cells. 2 years ago, in 2020, the Minister of the Environment, Conservation and Parks also issued a discussion paper on our provincial hydrogen strategy, and included its use as a low carbon fuel alternative in the transportation sector. I know some automakers, including Toyota, who obviously has a very significant presence in Cambridge, that Toyota has been supporting the development of this technology as well. So it's something that we're going to continue to watch as the technology matures. But I can tell you that I joke with the Premier that if he weren't Premier, if he were Minister in his cabinet, he would want to be the Minister of Transportation, because it seems to be one of his favorite topics. But this issue, hydrogen, a hydrogen strategy, is one of the things that he cares most about, and he's focused on it. He, as I said, that the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks issued this discussion paper, but he's working closely with the Minister of the Environment, myself, Minister Fedeli, the Minister of Economic Job Creation and Trade, and the Minister of Energy, to make sure that we're continuing to move this forward, because he thinks it's something that we absolutely have to implement.
Excellent. Next question. I would be interested to hear what part of her ministry work she finds the most engaging, and which part is the most controversial.
Well, thank you for that question. I think that transportation touches every part of the province. It engages it's something that affects all Ontarians, which means I hear a lot about it and different levels. It's from transit to highways to roads, bridges, active transportation. I think so I know it touches people's daily lives. I think the most engaging part is when I see the realization of the decisions that we make today and how they shape the future. I have found that, and I referenced this in my comments, that politics will often get in the way of moving forward on critical infrastructure projects that we need. Transportation is a very politicized area of government, and I have found that some of the most rewarding work that I've done as minister is when I've been able to work with different levels of government and cut through some of that political gridlock to unlock these projects that people need. And projects like the subways, our 4 priority transit projects in the city of Toronto and York region, the LRT in Hamilton, and moving forward with highway projects. They're very controversial, as you all know, but the Ministry of Transportation works in an independent way of politics to determine what the right solutions are and puts these forward. And it's important that we continue to put politics aside so that we can deliver on the kind of infrastructure our cities, our regions, and our province needs. So I have found that the most rewarding. It's also the most controversial. I'm a hockey mom, so I am generally a highway driver, and as much as I believe that we have to continue to develop our transit, regional transit, and local transit systems, we also need roads and highways, not just for our passenger cars, but also for our commercial vehicles. And so highways have obviously been the most controversial. They have become so recently, but they're also a critical part of infrastructure that we need to build. And so the key there, and this is my message on it, is this isn't about politics. This is about delivering on what people really need.
Excellent. Next question. What do you think will be the ballot question in this summer's provincial election?
So that's such a great question, especially as we're I think 76 days away from June 2nd. Not that I'm counting. As Minister of Transportation, so from a provincial, as Minister of Transportation, what I think it is I reference this in my remarks, is who is saying yes to building the province of the future. Because I deal with infrastructure all day long, I really believe that, and that getting shovels in the ground and showing regions like Waterloo region and other regions across the province that we are committed to moving things forward, getting rid of that political gridlock and delivering on these priorities is key. So building highways, building roads, bridges, and transit. But I also think, and I door knock regularly, I'll be out door knocking again tomorrow, Saturday, weather permitting. But I also know that affordability is also a key element of what people are going to be thinking about when they make their decision, when they go to the polls on June 2nd. So addressing the housing crisis, addressing affordability, those cost pressures. And we've seen recently with inflation now reaching over 5.1%, cost of groceries going up, the cost of goods going up. Affordability, I think, is going to be the other one. So I know in politics, there's one ballot question. Leadership, I guess, is it. Which party do people believe, which leader do people believe is the one who can deliver on those priorities of infrastructure, affordability, and housing. So I think it would be leadership.
I have to agree with you. I think it's gonna be leadership as well.
Yeah, that was a round. I got to it at the end, but leadership on those issues, yes.
So just to have a couple more questions. This next one actually isn't related to transportation, but it's been asked. As you know, the pandemic was a priority for hospitals during the last 2 years. I understand there's a great backlog of surgeries due to this. How does the government plan to speed up this backlog, as well as doing current surgery requirements for the next 2 years? In short, what is the plan to do 4 years of surgery, that is 2 years backlog and 2 years current with the next couple of years?
That is an issue that we as a cabinet discuss on a regular basis. We just recently lifted, I think it's Directive 2, that allowed us to get back to completing surgeries. Omicron created huge staffing shortages across our hospital sector, and so that slowed things down even more. So our plan is to continue to invest in infrastructure like hospitals, but also health and human resources are the key. We need more nurses, we need more PSWs, we need more trained staff. So it is addressing that backlog is going to be a challenge, but we have to do it by investing in our infrastructure and our staffing. I saw it on the backlog I dealt with, or I've been dealing with as Minister of Transportation, is the drive test center backlog. I don't know if your members are aware of it, but I certainly was, as a mother of a 17-year-old and 2 16-year-olds. It's impossible to get a test. And so we paused testing based on advice that we got from the Chief Medical Officer of Health. And we believe that was the right thing to do to protect people. On the hospital side, with respect to the surgery, the backlog surgery, we still were able to move forward with the most essential, the most critical surgeries. And so those did continue. But the backlog has been huge. And so we are looking at it from all different angles to make sure that we can start getting people the care that they need.
Excellent. So the last question, the direction and leadership of the Federal Conservative Party of Canada has been tumultuous since Mr. Harper's days. In fact, is showing signs of disunity. Would you be willing to share some insight or thought as to how a governing mandate at the federal level can be achieved? And have you ruled out future ambitions in that regard?
Well, I'll answer the second question. I'm not focused at all on the federal race at this time. As I said, got 76 days to go until our next provincial election. So I'm focused on that one. When I decided to run provincially, I always believed it would, I hope that I'd get the confidence of members of my constituents of York Simcoe a second time, maybe even more, to be able to deliver on the commitments that I made to them back in 2018. So I'm focused on that. But I will say, you know, there's the thing with the issue with the Conservative Party, the federal party, is it's a big tent. And we welcome people with diverse views, which I think is very different from other parties, especially the Liberal Party. And that's a challenge, managing that, but that's always been the case. I don't think that it's new. My father had a caucus in 1984 of 211 members, and they were diverse from across the country with diverse views, and they came to conservatism for different reasons. And so what the party needs is the right leader who can speak to those different parts of the party. I don't think it's disunity. I just think it's a fact of how our party's been, and really what it needs is a leader who can speak to those different elements of the party and speak to them with integrity. And so that's I think what we need. And I'm sure, I'm hopeful, but I'm also confident that we will get that kind of leader next time.
We actually, while we're talking, another good question just came in online. So if you don't mind, just add one more question. You've mentioned several times that regional transportation is key. Have you, Waterloo Region's proposed stage 2 of our LRT system, the ION system, on your radar? This is the part which would go from Fairway Road down to Cambridge. Can you comment on it?
Well, I can't comment specifically on it, but what I will say is regional transportation plans is something that we introduced in our government. One of the criticisms we always heard was that transportation planning was always done at Queen's Park by people who don't know the regions that they're making plans for. And so that's why we put forward these regional plans. And each region will have a task force made up of local experts. So that the feedback that we'll get from Waterloo Region on that is going to be key. I can say that the region, I think, is currently planning a business case for stage 2 or a business plan. And so as soon as that comes in, we'll be reviewing it. We know that it's an important project for the region, but we just we'll do it in partnership as we do with all of our transit plans.
Great. Now, before I pass things back to Barb, I just want to briefly mention, I just confirmed our Thursday, March 24th webinar speaker will be the CEO of the Ontario Real Estate Association, Tim Hudak, who was actually a previous leader of the Ontario PC Party. Now I'll pass things back to Barb to formally thank our speaker. Thanks, Caroline.
Thanks so much, Stephen. And thank you so much, Caroline, for joining us this evening. It's really informative and insightful, and we look forward to realizing the vision moving ahead. As I mentioned, this recording will be made available to everybody that has attended today, and we'll be receiving a follow-up email with that information. If you like what you saw today and you want to become a member, we would invite that. Otherwise, you can definitely provide a donation if that's something that interests you. We do encourage members, and we look forward to seeing you hopefully in the future, and certainly in March when we do have Tim Hudak as our guest. We are striving to work towards getting together in person, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, we're going to continue to bring Canadian digital politics to life through our webinar series. We appreciate your time this evening. Merci, and we'll see you in March.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Evening.